everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Rogue Deck Chronicles. I am Dean, and once again, I have Devin with me.
Hey guys, hopefully everyone enjoyed their weekend and had a good, setup to Atlanta. We're in the Southeast, so I know a lot of our friends are getting ready for that tournament.
Oh yeah, I've been talking to my crew a lot. We have a lot of people that are super excited to go up to Atlanta. Know a couple judge friends that got selected to be staff up there as well. So we got a nice selection of both staff and players. I know I wish I could gone, but I had other plans that kind of interfere with it. But I'm looking out for NAIC registration, so that's going to be my redeeming tournament for this season. But yeah, just everyone just focus on the new format. The post rotation is coming up this week, so no more VV Star, no more of the yellow border Pokemon starting Friday. So it's going to be very interesting as we go into rotation.
Yeah, and speaking of going into rotation, you guys had a rogue deck night that was pre-rotation, right?
Yeah, so as we talked about a couple times on our podcast and in our live show, one of the local leagues that I go to, we had a road night, which I helped organize and plan with my local professor, and it was really fun. We had about almost 20 people show up to that, which
That's not bad
was
at all.
way more than I was expecting.
So tell me about some of the highlights of that event.
Yeah, as we said, we originally had about 13 people, and then we got a bunch of walk-ins last second to brought our numbers up a little bit. But it was very interesting because so we had a rule set of any deck that made top 32 at a TPCI regional or greater was ineligible for play for that weekend or for this event, mainly because we wanted to showcase the decks that are just off the wall, very creative, just don't get the attention that they deserve. And it turns out that the most popular deck was Festival Lead. We actually had 3 or 4 people coming in with that 60. So it was really interesting seeing that a lot of single decks were played that night, including the one I played. I piloted the Heatran Metang deck.
Okay.
So the strategy of that deck is to get your Heatran up and going using the Metang Metal Maker ability to get the energy onto the Heatran, and the Heatran does 50 damage for every metal energy that you discard from that Pokemon, which you have to discard all those energies. And then you recycle the energy by playing the Basculegion from Lost Origins, where it does 20 for each energy in your discard, and you shuffle it all back into your deck. So it's a nice recycling of doing Heatran, Basculegion, Heatran, Basculegion, and you can just hit hard with it as a single prizer. And then if they hit into your Heatran, they get burned. So that's additional 20 damage between turns. And then if they don't heal from the burn, going back in your turn, another 20. So it helps you save an energy here and there. But it was a very fun deck. I've been playing around with this deck for like 3 or 4 months at this point. I was just waiting for an opportunity to play it.
Gotcha.
So that was a very fun night. A lot of interesting decks for sure. And I would talk more about them, but a lot of them are going to be rotated starting on Friday, including my beloved Heatran deck. But I can't wait for the next time we do this at our shop, if we do it, and seeing how we all adjust with rotation with being Scarlet Violet forward.
Gotcha. Okay. So obviously there's a deck that did, you and I both know the deck that did the best. Like you went what, 3-1, so you effectively got tied for second. And
yeah,
then
third because of resistance. But yeah, there was like 3 of us that went 3-1, and then the winner went 3-0-1. So no one went 4-0. So I will say that, but it was still being the rogue guy. I'm glad that I can show that, like, yeah, I know how to play these decks, and I went 3-1. So it shows my abilities to actually kind of put my money where my mouth is, being the rogue deck person in my league. So I really enjoyed that.
good. And then on top of you having a road deck night, there was another different format. As really, we have our rotation coming up. You did pre-rotation tournament, but then there's a future format tournament that happened in Japan in Miyagi. So let's talk about the Champions League results from Miyagi then.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about this tournament is that this is in a format that we will never get. And I think we talked about that last week, where they had Heat Wave Arena, which is only one half of our destined rivals.
Yes.
So we will never play in this format. So whenever we get these cards, it's going to be paired with the destined rival cards. So it'd be really hard to say like, oh, this is what we would have done, which we will never be able to do that. So it's really cool to see how those cards impacted this tournament and what really rose to the top. And based on the results, we see 3 decks that kind of just like separate from the other decks.
Yeah, there's 3 decks that are definitely the cream of the crop. And I think one piece that's actually very interesting from what you said is that these 3 decks really did not use any cards from Heatwave Arena.
Only one card from the Heatwave Arena really made an impact in the top 16 of the Miyagi Champions League, and that was that new Shaman, which is the new bench barrier coming out for us in May, but for them right now. But with the big difference that it only protects your Pokemon on the bench that do not have a rule box.
Yeah, and for these top decks, it honestly doesn't matter. It does have an effect. Let me just put it this way. I won't say it doesn't matter. Because out of these top decks, there are non-rule box Pokemon you want to protect. But they get turned into rule box Pokemon, obviously how the EX mechanic is now, where you get to protect your pre-evolutions is really what Shaman helps you do. Compared to the format we're going to be experiencing where it's like, all right, you have no bench protection unless it is already a Terra EX Pokemon.
Yeah, and I want to say the Shaman's really important because of one of the top decks that made actually got second place at Miyagi, which is actually no, I'm sorry, it got first place in Miyagi, which is the Dragapult. That's really the only deck that really impacts. The second place deck was the Gardevoir, which I believe the Shaman will also impact as well. So having that one card from Heatwave Arena really impacts the meta tremendously. I would say it's probably on the same power level as when Badu from Prismatic Evolution entered our format. That one single card single-handedly changed how we thought we play our decks and really changed what the most powerful deck in format was.
I think when in terms, it's not the most powerful card. I think it's the most impactful. I think powerful and impactful. I think you and I see them as the same thing because it to move mountains, right? The impact, the power of this deck, of really this card, is to shift the meta. It moves those mountains of the meta for sure. But someone's going to be like, well, that's not a powerful card. It doesn't do anything. I said it prevents Dragapult from spreading that 6 damage counters everywhere. I think that's impactful.
For me, yeah, super impactful, especially like playing even the rogue deck of the week that we'll talk about later on in one of my games. Just having that damage on my board meant so much because then it sets up multiple KOs in the next turn with a single boss. So to be able to prevent that on some of the support Pokemon that are out right now, like Fezandipiti, which has 210 HP, put one single damage counter on there, boss it up, and then you can take up to 4 prize cards in one turn. That's super impactful, and being able to prevent that with a single basic Shaman, it changes how you play and how you approach your matchups so much.
Absolutely. And then the deck that I've been seeing a lot on the ladder is Hop, in that Hop Zacian, where if you have a Shaman in the bench, that poke is not as impactful.
Poke and also donk potential. Because if you can set up having that Shaman on board, there's no way for them to really take out both your Pokemon or even set up a multi-prize turn their next turn.
Yep.
So yeah, I can't wait to see how Shaman really adjusts how we play the game starting in late May, early June. But we saw how that impacted Miyagi, which
Mm-hmm.
the top 3 decks by far were Dragapult, Gardevoir, and Raging Bolt. Like,
Yes.
if you look at the top 16, that's basically the top 16 with,
That's
I
13
think,
of the
what
16.
yeah, with what, one wall deck and like
So the other
a
three
Frost
decks,
Blast deck, and that's it.
yeah, the other three decks is one Milotic, one Frost Monkey Dory, one Terror Box. And
Yeah,
everyone was saying Terror Box is the next big thing. And if it is, it's going to have its time to shine over here with post rotation, but it's already eclipsed over in Japan. So it's very interesting to see if this is going to be a flash in a pan deck, or it's just this tournament is just a exemption to the rule, and this will get more popularity. We don't know, but for sure, the big three, Dragapult, Gardevoir, Raging Bolt, is very eye opening. Like out of 16, those are 13 of the 16. And I was telling you when we were talking about these results, Gardevoir was the biggest eye opener to me because I know you and I have been talking for a little bit about how everyone has been reading the obituary of Gardevoir, and we did talk about it during the Mega episode a couple weeks ago, saying Gardevoir's just going to need time to re-identify itself, and I think this set helped give it that time to kind of shift.
and honestly, I don't think it's that the time that we're giving it, it's going to be much less than it needs. Because even going to Atlanta, I think it's going to be a top tier deck. I don't. Yes, it loses some important pieces, but I don't think it loses enough pieces to make it unviable.
Mm-hmm.
I think just working around different strategies where you, as soon as you get enough energy in your discard, you're good to go. Get your Gardevoir EX in play, get your energy in the discard. I feel like that deck can do anything at that point.
No,
While like everyone's like, oh, it's losing Refinement Curlia. There's no way for you to dig through your deck. I think it has enough pieces where it can, and then also adjusting to the Monkey Dory build, where I believe the Gardevoir that got second place at this tournament played the 3 Monkey Dory, which we've
it
been
did.
seeing the shift to.
It did.
So going into more of a defensive mode versus being pure offense all the time, being okay of taking that damage because you're going to be moving 90 damage back to your opponent anyway.
Yep.
I think it's just a different way of playing the deck. So I'm not surprised to see it in the top 2. And even then, like, this almost won the tournament. Like,
Yeah. The final what was
it,
determined by a coin flip, right?
yes, because the Gardevoir attacked with the Monkey Dory with Mind Bend. The Dragapult was confused. So if it would have missed, if it would have got Tails, that Gardevoir had the attack to win the next turn. So the Dragon Ball player had to flip heads to win the whole tournament. And as soon as it flipped heads, I saw the video. That trainer was jumping. He was celebrating because it was. If you thought the coin flip for I believe what NEIC with Andrew Hedrick versus Stefan Ivanov was intense,
Mm-hmm.
I would say this coin flip was just as impactful, suspenseful as that coin flip. And I think at that point, if that's what comes down to Pokemon, that is probably top tier gameplay where you are relying on skill and the luck of the game at the same time.
It's almost like when you watch VGC and you have to hope for a pair of hacks. That's really all,
Yeah,
all it is. It's a 25% chance of it happening. Granted, coin flip's 50-50, but it still feels just as bad. Or feels
yeah.
just as good. It really is one of those situations. So,
I think it makes great viewing as well. Like being the last turn of the game, you know this coin flip determines the winner of this giant tournament. As a as someone watching it, I would be like on the edge of my seat. So I like it when games go to these suspenseful moments
mm-hmm.
because it just adds more to playing this game and being a part of this community. It's kind of like a more of a like going to a sports game like baseball, hockey. You're on the seat of the whole entire time versus sometimes when we watch card games or a video game, you can kind of tell what's going on and kind of predict like who's going to win, who's going to lose. So the fact that it brings this suspense, I think that was very, very cool.
Yeah, good close games are great because it sucks when you watch a final and it's 2-0 and both games are not even close. Those
Yeah,
are never fun finals to watch. The fact that a final went down to, like you said, a coin flip, a both players had game on board kind of situation. It's one of those that's what you want to see because then both decks are able to execute strategies, be able to show off what they're able to do. The trainers are and the pilots are able to show off their skill. That's what you want to see. That's what as a player, that's what you want to do. And I think if you're going to lose anyway, you're going to lose on something where you know you had it and you couldn't control the outcome. As
exactly.
much
So I'm
as you
glad
probably are upset about
that's
it, it's
yeah.
you'd rather lose that way.
So that's Miyagi. As we said, this is going to be that. It was in a format that we will never experience. We can take this and kind of move into Atlanta, what we're kind of expecting, because Atlanta is our first post-rotation tournament, as rotation occurs in real life starting this Friday, which is the day after this podcast comes out.
Yeah.
So I'm expecting a lot of Dragapult, a lot of Garvor, a lot of Raging Bolt, because as we mentioned, those lists did not really play any new cards from Destined Rivals, which means we've have access to these cards now.
Yeah. And I think also all three of those lists are not reliant on Journey Together.
Yes, I agree with that as well.
And with that
I
being
think
and then we'll talk about in a minute of the availability of cards problem. I know this set has had a very big scarcity issue, and it's going to be very intriguing to see how much of the old guard carries over to the new rotation.
Yeah, I know a lot of my friends have been playtesting for weeks, trying to figure out what decks to bring out there, and they're just really preparing for this new format. I know a lot of people are super excited for this format. I know I played in my last couple challenges and cups in the pre-rotation, and I'm glad that I can make cloth into retirement now, exploring new decks, seeing what's out there. But I think with that, I think it's a good transition into our topic of the week, which, based on the last couple weeks we have been doing, this is going to be a little more, I'm not necessarily going to say intense, but I say the conversation is going to be a lot more meatier compared to the last couple weeks, because we're going to talk about meta-analysis and deck selection, specifically when it comes to getting ready for a tournament like a post-rotation format in Atlanta this weekend.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about what is meta-analysis, but before we go into the analysis part, let's talk about meta. So meta is it's a slang term. It's something that is used regardless of the game. A lot of games use the term. What is meta? Meta. Well, meta stands for most effective tactics available. I know you and John talked about this way in the beginning of the podcast about a year ago now. But we want to actually go and talk about it just a little bit more. We wanted to take a further step compared to the first conversation you guys had. So we know what it stands for, most effective tactics available. But what does that mean? Well, to simply put it, it's the most effective strategies, tactics, or builds that are currently considered optimal for winning. And in Pokemon, I hate to say it, but meta typically turns into what becomes the most popular because people love winning.
Exactly. As you can look, when you watch a regional or even an international championship, a lot by the second or so round of the stream tournament, they'll put up a graphic on the TV, and it's usually the breakdown of what the tournament are, what the players brought. Typically, we see the 6 most popular decks in that room right now, specifically in the Master Division. So with people 16 and older. So as you said, typically the most effective deck, the strongest deck, is going to have the highest percentage of players bringing it. So the last couple tournaments has been Dragapult. It has been Regidrago when it was strong in that format. Typically, the strongest, best deck in format, also known as BDIF, that has been the most popular deck and is just also at the same time the most efficient way of winning the tournament, or at least the most strategic way of winning the tournament to that player base.
Yeah, and it's interesting because not every player will read a meta system the same, which is again the meta analysis, this overarching reading of the meta, reading of the trends, because meta doesn't mean I pick up this deck and I'm going to go undefeated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, they do the statistics of the 6 most popular decks, and usually the top 6 are within like a couple percentage points of each other. They usually are combined about 60 to 70% of the pool of decks in the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those situations where a lot of players actually look at the next step of data, which is not the most popular decks, but the best conversion ratio. And that, to a lot of people, will be like, oh, that's a good deck because it has a high conversion ratio. If a deck, let's just say if Lugia Archeops comes to a tournament, 100 players, 1/4 of the field is playing it, but only 4 of those 100 players make day 2, it's a popular deck. It would probably be arguably into a meta conversation because if 100 players took it, it means it had a good meta analysis. But maybe it didn't have a good meta call for that tournament because it had a poor conversion ratio.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people forget to talk about that part of the conversation. Typically, yes, the most popular deck is going to be the strategically the best deck. But once in a while, that deck usually has not one of the worst conversion rates, but the conversion rate maybe less than what people were expecting. And then on the opposite, there'll be decks where people don't even consider it that will have a very strong conversion rate. And an example for that will be the Cloth Trap Ghost in. I'm trying to remember. It was in one of the European regionals. It just came out of its debut from Sacramento, and literally the next weekend in that European regional, it had the strongest conversion rate with I think like 20 or 30% making day 2, which at that point for an unknown deck was so drastic.
Yeah. And again, we're talking about data, we're talking about information, and there's so many variables that go into both of those pieces of data. There's a lot of variables that go into popularity of a deck. So if a deck has 20% of the meta share, it means 20% of the player base brought it. And who is that 20% is always the question, versus maybe a deck that has only 5% of the meta share, but that 5% has 80% of those 5% converted. Well, who's in that 5% that led to a good conversion ratio? Like, you have to look into that data a little bit. You can't just take the numbers as superficial because there's variables outside of it. If a play group of very well established players, so a very bad example, but it helps kind of bring the point. If the top 10 players in the world all brought the same deck, and they're the only 10 people playing that deck in a tournament, and 6 of those 10 players go to day 2, well, that deck will have a 60% conversion ratio. Does that mean that deck is better than maybe the deck that had 5 times as many players play it, but had a less conversion ratio because the players in that pool were not as good? That's something to consider.
To think about too, because like it is a lot of times the pilot means a lot to a deck. Yes, the deck can take you so far with either your skill rating or your comfortability, but if you have a higher skill player, you can take any deck and do well with it. And we've seen that multiple times with players who will just switch decks all the time, and they're always making day 2 is because they have that innate ability to do well in the game and make the decisions and have the different plays that just comes with years of experience.
Yeah, because they know the meta and they have their hand on the pulse of the meta where they can make those pivots week to week. Or they just want to entertain themselves. They don't want to play the same deck over and over again, because let's be honest, playing the same deck for a very long time can get boring.
Exactly, and we'll go into a little more of that shortly. But we've talked about meta.
Mm-hmm.
So what if I don't want to play meta? Is there a term for that, or is there a strategy for that?
So there's 2 different things to that question. There's what is called counter meta, and counter meta, from a gaming context, is defined as strategies or tactics that are used to effectively combat or overcome the dominant or most popular strategy in use. So all because you want to do what's called counter meta doesn't mean you are countering the entire field. It's you are making a conscious decision to counter a particular deck or decks if you think you're going to be running into a lot of those. So if you want to use Miyagi as your case study, right? All right. Just came off Miyagi. I need to build a deck that's going to do well against Raging Bolt, Gardevoir, and Dragapult. What cards are in the pool that can counter those three? Or counter two of the three? That would be a counter meta strategy, because you're not trying to beat the field. You're trying to beat particular things. It's almost to a situation where in sports, you're not trying to beat everybody, you're trying to beat one team and one strategy. And it's how do you play? Like, it's one of those, if a team, I'm going to use football, you know me, I'm football, I love football. If you play a defense that's going to go against and do well against a team that goes long, does do a whole bunch of Hail Marys, has a whole bunch of big wide receivers, a strong arm quarterback, and you will beat that type of matchup. You will do well against teams that will play that because they have no other way to beat. They have no other way to play. But if you play against a team that's going to pound the ball between the box, it's going to use their running backs, maybe some slants routes, shorter routes, and you're not playing up in the front of the field, you can get beaten another way, but you're going to take your win with your main defensive strategy. And that's what counter meta is. You're going all in on countering a particular set of strategy or strategies that may not be good against everything else. And that's very important when it comes to figuring out what you want to do. Now, the other half of the question you asked is what we all talk about, which is rogue. When we make our decks, we talk about deck building. We don't try to go counter meta very often, because rogue just means, realistically, the deck isn't as popular as other decks. And it has a more flexible strategy. We aren't trying to counter a particular deck. We're trying to do well against the field. So there's two branching ways to go about analyzing and figuring out how to go against this meta that has been defined by the general populace.
Yeah, and I know with me, that's why we created this podcast. That was something I was known to do. I usually never played the meta decks or the best deck in format, and I have multiple reasons why doing it. But a lot of times, I always felt drawn to the more rogue style decks, the decks that no one really plays, and picking it up, spending time with it, and just getting comfortable enough to where I know my lines of play, and I knew how to beat X deck or beat Y deck, because people weren't thinking of this deck when they're going into a tournament, and I kind of get them off by surprise with that. So that's why I went towards that route, and that's why I really like the rogue style decks. But when it comes to picking a deck for a tournament, what are some factors that we that play into consideration of why we pick a certain deck? Is there a certain strategy we go into? Like, getting ready for any tournament, local or even major wise, how do we kind of get ready and pick a deck for that?
So, to me, there's a couple factors you always have to ask yourself going into that question, right? First and foremost, what do you have available? And that can be answered one of two ways. What's in my collection, or what can I get fairly easily to add to my collection? Now, I'm going to throw the obvious out there, and then we're going to kind of leave it there. The singles market is there. If you need a card, you can go online and buy it. It's there. It exists. It's something that you could easily cherry pick what you want. But not everyone can go and buy the cards they need on the legitimate moment that they need them. There's the other way of acquiring cards, obviously, is cracking packs and getting product. And that is sometimes a factor of availability of product, and in terms of scarcity, and in terms of just the product that's being created. So if you want to play Gardevoir, but you can't get a hold of Gardevoir because you can't buy the single, or you can't get the theme battle deck it was in, well, maybe you just won't play it because you can't get the cards into your collection at that moment. Now, you might have to think ahead and plan ahead for that, which is where the singles market can help you a little bit. Because you order a card online doesn't mean you get it tomorrow. So you kind of have to look into your collection to figure out what you can play first.
Yeah, and I think this subtopic in this conversation is a little more, I wouldn't say crucial to going into Atlanta specifically, because let's be honest, getting Journey Together stuff has been extremely difficult.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like if you didn't go to a pre-release or if you didn't like pre-order anything, the likelihood of you getting product at a reasonable price was super low.
And
I'm a prime example because I didn't get any product. I had to order all my stuff on the single market because I was not available during pre-release, so I didn't get my hands on it early. And then as soon as it hit the shelves, I did not want to pay that price. Honestly, I love my LGSs. Don't get me wrong, but I'm not in a position financially where I can afford what they were asking.
Yeah.
So I made the conscious decision. I'm like, I'll just wait. I'll figure out what decks I want to play, and I'm just going to buy the singles for it. And I know a lot of players, especially when I was talking to some of my locals, availability is very important to them because they don't have the money to spend $20 on a single card. I remember when Teal Mask Ogre-Pon was $20. That's why I stay away from those decks. I couldn't do it.
Yeah, and you mentioned the availability to product. Sometimes, and you say, "Oh, people pre-release." Well, even people who did pre-releases properly got their orders canceled. It was, are you lucky enough to get to a distributor, an LGS, that was able to get the product that you ordered ahead of time, and didn't have to worry about the MSRP increase or the secondary market increase or the scalper problem that we have over here in the West. Like, the availability of product with Journey Together is a problem, but it wasn't a problem that anyone could have predicted. Because it isn't the fact that the product isn't being printed like older sets used to have. This set has been printed, but it had such a high demand that no one could predict that, and it sucks for players who are competitive because I'm going to call it what it is. The secondary market, not even the singles market, the secondary market of collectors, scalpers, has become more and more of a problem affecting Pokemon TCG, and it unfortunately does affect the competitive player base, and it's unfortunate because cards that really don't have much playability to them are being asked for such a high price because they're pretty or because it's an evolution, it's SIR, however you want to put it, which also means the other cards that do have competitive viability to it are stuck behind them because they're in the same packs.
Yeah, and don't get us wrong. We love the collectors out there. They are another category that enjoy the trading card game just like us as the players. It's just the reality of the situation is the product availability was very low. We're not necessarily blaming one group or another. It's just we recognize, okay, this is what's happening. This is what's going on because of what's happening. And we just have to find a way to live around it. So with price and availability of cards, sometimes we may be limited in what decks we can play.
Yeah.
Not necessarily saying like the deck options are worse, but I think it goes to a new mindset of like, okay, I can only play ABC instead of XYZ. How can I optimize me playing this deck in a tournament because I didn't have the options of getting the other cards? And I think that goes with maybe playability and also thinking about like what type of deck from what the options given to you want to play. Sometimes because you're not super familiar with a certain card, you may want to go for a more straightforward linear deck
Mhm.
where you know what to do every single turn. It's not really different strategy based on your matchup versus decks that may have a little more complex gameplay and have different lines and different ways of a victory based on what you're going against, and getting to each line may be a little more convoluted, but it is present and available to you during a certain matchup.
Yeah, and sometimes the general strategy of the deck is going to be something that you want to consider. I will never play a control deck, not because I don't think I could ever figure out how to play it. It's just a style that I don't personally like, but it's also when you really want to try to master control, it's a different level of thinking, a different way of thinking how to play the game, and I just don't want to invest that type of energy into learning and mastering a deck. I rather master a deck that makes me more it's more fun to me. Um, like I'll be honest, if I wanted to go to the Euro deck night, I probably would have brought my Espeon Frostlass deck that we profiled about month and a half ago on the channel. I
Mm-hmm.
thought that was the most fun I've had in a very long time playing a deck. And I would learn and I would actually put time to practicing and getting the lines better in that type of deck. And it's nothing to do with meta, it's just I enjoyed it.
And I think you brought a very good point there. Is play a deck that you're going to have fun with, because typically if you have more fun with the deck, the better you will do with it. You're not, and with that, you when you enjoy playing a deck, you're not. I'm not saying you're not going to think as hard, but exploring the different lines of play and playing the deck is a more enjoyable experience, and you're going to have a better time and you'll think clearer versus a deck you're not comfortable with. You're going to get frustrated on, like, I don't know what to do here, what's the best line of play, and you don't want to do that in a tournament setting.
Mm-hmm.
Do that at your casual night where there's nothing really on the line deck. That is a perfect atmosphere for that.
Yeah.
But in this conversation where we're talking about like what to bring and play in a tournament, play something you're comfortable with, play something you're experienced with, and play something you enjoy. I
Yeah.
think above all else, that is the most important strategy to picking a deck is, am I having fun with this deck?
Yeah, and I think part also of going into deck selection is understanding what you are capable of as a pilot. And it's one of those situations, I've seen it plenty of times, and you've seen it plenty of times in your league nights as well. I was told this was the best deck. Why aren't I doing better with it? Well, how well do you know the deck? All because it's the best thing. Like you can be given the deck that just won Worlds, but can you operate it?
Mm-hmm.
It's just like driving a car. I'll be honest, I can't drive a stick shift. Doesn't mean those type of cards are awful. They're just not for me. I'll
Yeah.
drive an automatic transmission. I can't drive a stick, which means there's a world of vehicles that I'm not going to ever be able to enjoy, and that's okay.
Yeah. And don't get us wrong. Sometimes the strength of a deck can take you so far in the tournament or slash casual setting just because it's that powerful of a deck. But once you get to the minor nuances of, okay, what happens when I go against an experienced player as well? What happens when I go against a deck that is a counter to my deck? How can I win this matchup? And that's where the comfortability, that's where the experience and really just being able to know the deck inside and out comes from.
Mm-hmm.
You can have the same two players playing the same deck, but the one that knows that deck much better is have a higher likelihood of winning that matchup just because they took the time and effort to learn how the card interactions go, how do I win a mirror, how do I win in a certain situation. And it's really, I wouldn't say practice makes perfect. It's more a perfect practice makes perfect, but being
Absolutely.
in a situation where you play the deck so many times, you can see your lines more clear versus someone that's never been in that situation before.
Yeah, and that's where I think when it comes to deck selection and understanding the meta, all this kind of rap going back to itself, right? All because you're told a deck is good doesn't mean it's automatically going to win.
Exactly.
and all because you're told, all right, these are Omnipoke, LDF. I mean, back in the day, Rare Candy, like all these content creators, all these people that analyze and read and do all this stuff. Like, these are the decks. This is what we're. This is. If they could predict that, they would be playing in those decks and winning themselves. There's variability in the game. There's an RNG element to the game, but there's also a skill element to the game. As much as people will say TCG isn't skill based, I will argue it is. It's a skill game of a little bit of luck, and you have to be able. And part of the skill of the game is figuring out where and what weapon do you want to pick in order to fight your fights, and that's where your deck comes into play.
Exactly. And I think the last, I guess, subcategory, subtopic in this greater conversation of meta-analysis and deck selection is, what is your goal for the tournament? Because if you're going just to have fun, of course, play a deck that you enjoy and that you have fun with. But if you're, I know in the competitive realm, we want to go and win, well, okay, pick the deck that will help you achieve that goal the easiest. And yes, we want to advocate play the deck you have fun with, but a lot of times players pick the best deck and practice a lot with it is so they can get comfortable with it, and they're picking the deck that is going to help them achieve their goal the quickest, the soonest, and the easiest. But like as we get later on to the competitive year, some people just have a goal of like, I just want to get top X and X, top 256, top 512 to guarantee my spot for Worlds. Okay, so some people may adjust and take something that's maybe a little more consistent versus something that is more high rolly, just so they can get a certain amount of wins, or they may take something that is more, even the opposite, more high rolly, more reward based versus consistency, because they want to make sure they can get a quick win or something like that. So I think knowing what your goal is for a tournament is just as important as the deck selection and the process that goes into it.
And I think also the question is, what tournament are you going to is just as valid. When I'm picking a deck for a league challenge, I'm probably going to play a deck that's a little bit off the wall, or a deck that I'm experimenting with. That's a testing session for me, because there's really no risk of going to a challenge and going 0-3. There is no risk. That's more data, that's more experience that you're gaining, and if you go 3-0 with it, then you gain. It's a high risk, high reward, low risk situation.
Yeah.
And when it comes to cups, it's all right. I need to be maybe a little more calculated with my options, because there is more reward, and you have to either play riskier or figure out your consistency value where you will be able to probably have a more opportunity chance. Again, that's where the meta-analysis is. It's, all right, I'm going to go to this cup. I'm expecting 30 people. I'm expecting maybe 5 Dragapult. I'm expecting a handful of Gardevoir. Can my deck handle about half the room being these 2 decks? Or do you just play a deck, you know what, this is my strategy. Can decks counter me, and will I be able to set up better than them? Both of them are 2 different ways of looking at the meta, being like, am I going to counter something, or am I just going to withstand everything? Those are still 2 different things that you can take into consideration when you are looking at maybe a lower amount of people in the field. Now, regional, you just, like you said, you kind of pick where you want to be. Do you want consistent, and you want to have games where you're going to be competitive for 2 to 3 rounds every match? Or do you want to try to high roll and just try to steamroll your opponent and see who can stop
you? And I think going back to the local meta too, for all those people that are local heroes out there that only does the challenges and cups and don't go to the majors, first of all, there's nothing wrong with that. Not everyone has the opportunity and the means to go to regionals and internationals. You're talking to 2 people here that only go to maybe 1 or 2 events a year.
I've never been.
In some cases, Devin doesn't even go at all. So there's nothing wrong with just doing your locals. So with that, I think there's a little bit of an advantage playing in your locals and knowing what the actual meta is in your area. I would say a good example of that is the beginning of the competitive season for me. I've been playing nothing but cloth. That's not a secret to anyone. But I will say, if anyone from my local scene is listening to this, you guys play the same deck all the time, and I took that to my advantage. I recognize that my local league is full of Raging Bull players, Charizard players, and I forgot what else. But those were the two main decks, and I'm like, okay, I am playing cloth. I am not taking out that Hisuian Electrode in my deck, even though everyone's telling me I should, just because that card with the super effective glasses helps me against the Charizard deck. And then, okay, Raging Bolt, I know you're not playing the Ancient Booster Capsule. I'm going to hit you hard and poison you. And just because I'm active in my local scene, I took that information and I adjusted my deck accordingly. And playing in your local scene, that is an advantage that you and only you have. So if you know what your league plays day in and day out, use that to your advantage. That is your meta analysis. We can take this conversation as on the grander scale of a regional or international, and you can still take the same concepts and like, okay, what is my local meta? It may not be Dragapult, and it may not be Gardevoir. I could be in a league that plays a lot of Archaludon, a lot of Goldango, a lot of Metal type. Okay, maybe it may be advantageous to invest in a Fire type deck then, where you can hit for weakness and play to that strength, or play something that is Okoe. So like, okay, I'm playing against a lot of Archaludons. Maybe I should play Raging Bolt or Goldango and get the one shots over and over again and just win the 2-2-2 trade.
Yeah.
So taking the grander conversation that we're having with the regional and IC discussion, you can always apply these same concepts to the local level as well.
Yeah, and it's one of those situations where when I used to be more invested into the game, I knew the players that were going to every single tournament. When you start going on a circuit like that, you get to know each other. You get to know each other's preferences and their comfortability levels. And some of them you would be like, all right, this deck just won a tournament. He's going to play this next week. Or this deck has been doing well. This deck is being called the BDIF, so so-and-so player is going to play it. You kind of know how people kind of react to information. And you can take that to your advantage, where I always played a set of decks that I was always comfortable with, but I think the best stretch I ever had was a weekend where I did a double cup and I got top 16, top 32, and with a Zoroark GX, Decidueye GX deck, which was pinging and swinging with trade, and that was the closest to meta I probably ever played, and it still was only like a B tier deck. Other than that, I played decks that I could afford to get and I could get from my local card shop. So there was the longest time where I didn't play with Shaman EX because they were $50 cards, very similar to why you don't play Teal Mask Ogerpon. I didn't play with Tapu, like more than one Tapu Lele GX for the longest time because I only pulled one. And I had to wait for Tapu Lele GX to get its own product. It was in its own tin. I'm like, oh, I can buy the tin, and the tin's worth the money. Because the single card was worth the value of the tin, and the packs were fun. So it was always one of those situations where I was kind of evolving my deck preferences based on what I could do in terms of card availability, price point for me as a player, but also I was also injecting that what am I going to be facing week in and week out to be able to position myself to just do well. And am I playing a deck that fits my play style? And I ended up always finding something that did. So it's really that evolution of those 3 points of, all right, what can I get my hands on? What's going to do what can do well, and what am I comfortable playing out of what could do well? Because if you're just going to play the best deck every single time and you have unlimited pockets, great for you. Hopefully you have fun doing that. I'm never going to tell someone that's a bad thing, but it's just not the experience I ever had the luxury of doing, nor am I honestly ever want to do.
Yeah, so I think let's take this conversation and let's do our own case study with it.
Yeah.
And I think a good way to do this is talking about the rogue deck of the week.
Yeah, and honestly, I think the deck that you picked this week is very interesting from a meta, like again, from the meta analysis perspective of what has been doing well recently with a mix of mechanics that is underutilized in the general game sphere.
Yeah, so the rogue deck of the week this week that I picked was Incineroar EX, and I'll be honest with you all listeners, I had a very hard time trying to figure out what the deck of the week will be this week. I tried a couple other decks that I didn't even think of this at first, and I just couldn't get them going. I couldn't get them optimized, and honestly, I got my inspiration from the VGC. So this week is
Yeah.
Incineroar EX. Incineroar has always been dominant in the video game realm, with usually with the Intimidate ability and Parting Shot and getting in and out. But with this card, when I looked at it, it is a Stage 2, 320 Fire type Pokemon with the Hustle Play ability, where for every Pokemon your opponent has on their bench, the attack cost of your attack is one color less. So if they put four bench Pokemon on in play, you only need a single fire energy, and then you're hitting for 240, and then you're burning your opponent. So as soon as I read that, I'm like, hey, there's a new card that came out in Journey Together that deals a burn. And it's not the Volcanion, which I actually tried in there, and I realized you don't need that. You just need the Magmortar, which has the Magnus Surge ability where it adds 3 more damage counters in Pokemon Checkup for any Pokemon that's burn. So 240, and then you're doing 50 damage for burn in between Pokemon Checkup. Yes, they have to flip and they can cure the burn, but 290 damage for one single fire energy? I'm like, that is too good to pass up. Let me see if I can make this work. And after doing some testing, I paired it with the new Blaziken EX, where it has the Seething Spirit ability, where you can attach any energy, so you can put whatever energies you want in your deck onto any of your Pokemon. So I can set up multiple attackers at the same time, and I have the draw. I use the draw of the Dunsparce to really churn through my deck. And once you got a couple Pokemon set up, I felt like I could take on any deck. And
yeah, you're pretty much one-shotting all the stage 1s.
One-shotting all stage 1s. And one cool thing I kind of thought about too is that we mentioned earlier, there's been a resurgence of certain decks with rotation, and really 2 types that's becoming more popular is Steel and Grass. Well, I'm hitting weakness into both those types. Yeah. Yes, the Metal Defender can be a little annoying, but if I can play my bosses at the right time, I can negate that ability. And then if I'm going against Goldango, that's an easy victory for me.
Yeah. So the one thing I wanted to ask you about this deck, so I looked at the list, is the double stage 2 mechanic that is not a Pidgeot EX. How do you feel running 2 stage 2s in a deck like this?
So I will say it is a little clunky with some of my practice plays, and then as you will see in the video, it can be difficult to get your board set up. So because of that, the ace spec that I chose for this deck is Precious Trolley. I kind of took a couple notes from the Mamoswine deck where it goes with the same strategy. Because a lot of people are like, oh, why don't you play the Hyper Aroma, or why don't you play something else that helps you with the evolution better? Well, in a deck that plays multiple stage 2s, getting your bench set up is almost just as important. So going second, playing the Arven for the Precious Trolley and TM evolution, and just getting that set up. As soon as I do that, I feel like I was in a decent spot. So you try to get multiple Torchics and multiple Littens out and then evolve them to the stage 1s. So that way, if they take one out, you have a backup, either where you just use the Rare Candy to evolve up and just hope that their bench is full enough to where, okay, Rare Candy, single attached Fire Energy, 240 and burn. Then you're hitting for 260. And if they don't heal the burn, they're into 280. And at that point, they could be knocked out by then, depending on what you go against, or they're at a point where I just hit them again and I get the knockout, and they're hitting into me for 320, which is very difficult unless you're playing like Goldango or Raging Bolt.
Gotcha, and that's a favorable prize for both of those anyway. So it's that you're taking that as you're gonna one shot me, but I'm easily gonna one shot you. So it's the punch for punch kind of trade. It's that prize trading that you were talking about earlier.
Exactly, and even thinking about the Archaldon matchup, unless they're playing the poison package, the most damage they're doing to me is 220, and then I'm hitting them for at least 240 if they did Metal Defender against me, and then the burn. So it takes, if I can attack into them first, I'm usually going to win the prize trade, and then I usually have more gusting options or more draw options, what they can do, and I just kind of win and kind of take out the Pokemon that didn't use Metal Defender, or I take out their Fezandipiti, reduce their draw, because they're not playing the Dunsparce. They're really relying on their supporters and Fezandipiti for their draw. So it's just using kind of not necessarily a counter meta for what I've been seeing online, but taking into account that fire weakness is becoming more beneficial for me. So let's build a deck that takes advantage and that no one's really expecting, because no one's expecting a good fire deck right now.
Mm-hmm. And if they're expecting fire, they're expecting Volcanion. And if they are expecting fire, they're waiting for Ethan's Typhlosion to come out. So they're not expecting fire now, but they are expecting fire in the future.
Yeah, but right now, no one's really caring for the Destined Rival cards. They're seeing, okay, I'm going to go against Dragapult. I'm going to go against Gardevoir. I'm going to go against Archaldon, maybe the Terrabox, which none of those have any fire Pokemon. Maybe the Flareon, but no one's really playing Flareon right now. So as soon as I hit, as you saw in my first couple games, I hit a grass deck and I hit a metal deck that wasn't Archaldon. As soon as I saw what I was going against, I'm like, this is going to be easy. And I was able to set up my board and just kind of go to town on that.
Gotcha. Well, again, the Rogue Deck of the Week this week was Incineroar EX. There will be a deck profile showcase video that will launch on Friday at noon Eastern on the YouTube channel if you want to watch Dean's gameplay. He did do 3 really good matchups. Like he said, 2 of them were against weakness. The other one was against a meta contender, and it was a good showcase of a deck that could position itself, that could do well at a cup or a challenge. I don't know. You wouldn't bring this deck to a regional, right? It doesn't have that power level, you don't think?
Not yet. I think I will need to spend more time on developing something a little more consistent, just because it is a stage 2 deck. I do not play the Pidgeot. Typically, the stage 2s with Pidgeot has a little more consistency because of that quick search ability. But I would say it hits hard, and if you're planning on seeing a lot of Archaldon, a lot of stage 1 decks, which I can see this doing somewhat well against EVBox, Terrabox. Actually, no, maybe not Terrabox, because Cornerstone can be a problem for this deck because a lot of your attackers have abilities. So I can see the Terrabox being somewhat difficult unless you can play around the Cornerstone. But I would say take this to a local. I can see this doing well at a challenge or even a cup.
Gotcha. So like we said, the deck list will be in the show notes of this week's episode, and it will have its own video that will be launching on the Friday after this episode debuts. So if you want to see it in action, you'll have an opportunity on the YouTube channel to see that as well. But other than that, Dean, is there anything else you want to add to this week's episode?
No, just thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Rogue Deck Chronicles. If you're watching us on the YouTube channel, please like this video, subscribe to us if you have not subscribed. Go ahead, tell your friends. We are on all podcasting platforms, so find us on there as well. Help us with our algorithm. We are trying to increase our popularity and our visibility on YouTube and on Spotify, so anything will help. Leave a comment on what you thought about this episode. What do you think about the Rogue Deck of the Week? What improvements you think could be made? Because we are always open to changing our decks and making them more optimized. Obviously, me and Devin are. This isn't our full-time gigs, so we just do this whenever we have free time. And also let us know what ideas and topics you want us to talk about. We'll take a look at that, and that could be a future episode of the Rogue Deck Chronicles. But yeah, other than that, Devin, you have any last words for today's episode?
No, it's one of those, I think, looking at the meta critically week by week, month by month is an important skill that every player needs to sharpen. I don't think you're ever going to master it, but I think it's one of those you take the information given to you and you take it with the information at the value you want to take it. And that doesn't mean don't watch the content creators doing their tier lists or just don't rely on what Limitless tells you. Put all that information into the pot of knowledge, and that way you can digest it and be able to figure out what's going to be best for you for whatever level of event you want to go to.
Exactly. So take this as just some advice from us. Again, we're no experts per se, but we've been playing this game for long enough and have experienced our fair share of tournaments. So we kind of an idea of how we pick decks and what we kind of saw in our local community. Once again, good luck to everyone playing in Atlanta this weekend. Good luck to the professors in our community that got chosen to staff it. I hope that all the players have a great experience and that the staff do an excellent job doing what they need to do to keep this tournament rolling and going. But with all that being said, thank you for listening to the Rogue Deck Chronicles. And as always, have fun playing those sneaky decks.
Bye, guys.